Hello everyone, we are here today with Dr. Töppel, the expert
Hello.
on the Battle of Kursk from the German side. And let's talk about the effectiveness of ground attacks by aircraft against tanks from both the German side and the Soviet side, because there's quite a lot of myths going on, but also we talk a bit about lunch, and sometimes there's some back and forth, and so you know more on this. So generally, how effective were the Soviet air attacks against German tanks during the Battle of Kursk?
Yeah, that's a big issue because we still have to do a lot of research about this. But the Soviet air forces, they wrote down, or they reported a lot of destroyed German tanks. And I have some examples in one of my articles. I quote when they say, "Oh, in one attack we destroyed 70 tanks from the 9th Panzer Division," and then you look up at the files, the war diary, and there is not a single tank that was lost to an air attack. And I know what from spontaneously, I just know of one Ferdinand tank destroyer who was hit by a direct hit by an aerial bomb from a Petlyakov P-2 bomber, and was completely destroyed. But I can't think of any other a tank at the moment that was destroyed by air attacks. Air attacks were nonetheless quite dangerous, but not so much for the tanks, but because they destroyed the soft skin vehicles and the trucks and the supplies and stuff. This was a bigger problem, but the direct effect against tanks during the Battle of Kursk from Soviet anti-tank aircraft is negligible.
Yeah. And also one aspect, if you're in a tank and you planes attack, then usually you will button up, so you reduce your combat effectiveness also. And there's also, if you get hit, some parts outside of the tank can get damaged, and there's some negative effects, but in general, tank kills are rather uncommon.
Yeah.
And for the German side,
exactly, the German side is it's quite interesting for me personally, because I have this example. I wrote an article about. You can find it on the internet. I wrote this in 2009, and you still to this day you find in almost all the books that have been written about the Battle of Kursk this famous incident from 8th July, where a German Henschel 129 unit is supposed to have been wiped out, apparently wiped out a whole Soviet tank brigade that was trying to attack the flank of the Division Das Reich, SS Division Das Reich. And I checked the records, and I found out the tank destroyer unit, they not even reported destroyed Soviet tanks. They said, "Oh, we saw some hits, but we saw no burning tank." So this is all made up after the war, and not in the original war diary. They don't even claim to have destroyed a Soviet tank, but they say after we attacked and we hit some of them, apparently 6 hits. I think they said no destroyed tanks, but we hit. The Russians lost their spirit apparently, and they turned around and gave up the attack. And this is not uncommon. You really find this in Soviet reports, that they say our troops are terrorized by the enemy aircraft, and sometimes this is against morale. And it could really be happening that the Henschel attack, low-level attacks, they shoot, sometimes hit, but no deadly hit, and they say, okay, we have to break off the attack. The attack was broken off, but there was no report, not even a German report, about destroyed tanks, and from this Henschel 129. And generally we say, okay, all these reports are obviously grossly exaggerated with Hans-Ulrich Rudolf with his tanks. But I got a bit skeptical again in the other direction when I read some Soviet reports. I read some original Soviet reports, and they say, oh, the Germans introduced a new tank destroyer, and several of our tanks got hit with this cannon and were destroyed and burned out and stuff. And apparently, and I wrote an article about this too several months ago, about the effectiveness of the Stuka, the normal, not the cannon, Kanonenvogel, the normal bomber, dive bomber Stuka, and they were obviously more effective than we think nowadays. they were. In my opinion, it's that the most impact had the normal Stukas who attacked with bombs, and you have this from German reports that they say, they cleared the path, and I quote one of them of the German panzer soldiers who said, okay, we just had to wait. There were Russian tanks dug in, and we couldn't hit them, so we called the Air Force, and then we saw that the Stukas really with precision attacks knocked them out, and we could go on, and tanks were burning, and the soldiers came with hands up. And you also have this from Russian reports that they say our tanks were attacked by Stukas, and we suffered heavy losses. Yeah, so
because I remember when I was reading up for Panzers and Stukas in my video, there was actually the argument, I think it was Murray or some author who noted actually that the Luftwaffe, I think in Poland and France, realized that they killed very few vehicles or even artillery or something, but the effect was devastating. So not devastating losses, but devastating on the morale and everything.
Yeah.
So but you read up that they had real losses by bomb hits or something.
Yeah.
But okay, these tanks were dug in.
In this example, but in the other reports they were not. In his German report, when he says, okay, I saw this, or in the German report's original war diary from the 9th Army, they say, okay, we used the Stukas to a great effect against dug-in tanks. But these Russian reports, they were not about. I read 2 of them published in a Russian book, even by Zamulin, about March 1943, the counterattack at Kharkov. And this is the first time, obviously, when the Kanon Stuka, the cannon Stuka appears, and they say, oh, the Germans have a new tank destroyer aircraft with a 3.7 centimeter gun, and it knocked out several of our tanks. When you see it from, and sometimes it's okay, we can stretch this, but sometimes even the Soviets used the German Luftwaffe as excuse. And I read this in reports about the famous Prokhorovka tank engagement. I know the Luftwaffe had not much of an effect there because the weather was bad. They couldn't fly so many missions. But when you read the Russian reports, they say, the second part of the attack, we couldn't go on with the attack because we were permanently attacked by German aircraft and Stukas and stuff. And no, it's not really. It can't be the case if you see how many missions the Germans flew that day. Okay, sometimes they used it as excuse, and sometimes, but really, apparently, they had an effect. But we still have to do a lot of research about this. It's a very interesting question.
That's very interesting because the moral effect is that is noted everywhere. That if you lose air superiority, your ground forces, the effectiveness is vastly reduced. I mean, also not due to obvious reasons like recon, but also how the soldiers and everyone feels. I mean, it's like with infantry. Sometimes the infantry was like there were tanks behind, there were Stuks or Sturmgeschütze, and infantry was attacking, but then they waited for the tanks and Stuks to drive up. Even they got in a position where they couldn't support the infantry more or less effectively, but threatened themselves. But the infantry wasn't moving any more forward. And with aircrafts, they probably had a similar effect if you have your planes flying over, or if you don't see them at all. And if you mentioned, because the Soviets lost the air superiority in the beginning of the Battle of Kursk, so maybe that was also a shock to a certain degree. Also.
Yeah, and Stalin was also very disappointed. He phoned. You can read it from. I have to admit, I took this from some memoirs from Zhukov, or he says Stalin called first day and how are our aircraft doing, and do we have the air superiority, and said, no, not really, and stuff. And he said, okay, this is a disappointment, and they should all be exchanged, and this was a shock for the Soviets to engage.
Do you have anything on the whole? Hans-Ulrich Jodl is, of course, the most famous Stuka pilot. In this case, I mean, I read one point that the Soviets had actually a bounty on his head.
I read this too, but I never checked this.
So you didn't check this so far?
No.
So we don't know yet if it's valid or not.
I don't know much about Rudolf apart from the official stories. Apparently, he was like a myth. You know that he was, at the time when he was, during the war, he already was a myth within the Wehrmacht. In my article, I wrote a few months ago about the effectiveness of the Stukas. I mentioned Rudolf, and I quote a German soldier from the Totenkopf division. and he says we were surrounded by Russians, Russian tanks, and suddenly we heard roaring in the air, and 2 of our Kanonenstukas came, and we knew it was Rudel. And I said, okay, how should he know? Rudel was not the only one flying a Kanonenstuka, and he describes how these Kanonenstukas knocked out several tanks that exploded, and the Soviets pulled back, and they said they saved us, and Rudel saved us. And I thought, okay, how can he know that this was Rudel? And apparently, as soon as a Kanonenstuka appeared, they said, oh, it's Rudel, yeah. It's apparently. But how should he know that this is Rudel? Yeah.
So it's similar to the Allies that every time they face the Panzer, they call it a tiger.
Exactly. It's always a tiger. Yeah.
It's always a tiger. It's always
Rudel. Yeah.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, but it would be interesting to go deeper. But it would be interesting to do so many things. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to get in contact with somebody who actually maybe can verify or deny if Rudel came really up. But because if there's a bounty on his head, this must be well documented to a certain degree. Because it would be at least in some official, I guess they have some army newspapers or some stuff, at least in that in. And so also in non-classified documents, it must be available. So
this is an interesting question.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Thank you.
And see you next time. Bye.
Bye.